Hello everyone, welcome to the RSA. I'm Julian Thompson, Director of Enterprise here at the RSA, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here today for the special lunchtime event. Before we begin, the usual notices, so if you could just make sure your mobile phone is switched to silent, and also to remind you, as you've probably already guessed, the event is being recorded. So if you'd like to share the podcast and video clips with friends and colleagues, they'll be available for free to download from our website in a few days' time. And also for those joining us on the web, welcome to you, and a reminder that the hashtag for today is #RSAFast. So get involved in the discussion on Twitter, and you can ask questions that way too when we get to the discussion. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Josh Kaufman. Josh is an acclaimed author and business advisor. His book, The Personal MBA, was an international bestseller. And he specializes in teaching professionals in all industries and disciplines how to master practical knowledge and skills. And his work has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Fortune, Time, Business Week, and Wired, amongst many others. And Josh joins us today to share his latest thinking from his new book, The First 20 Hours, How to Learn Anything Fast. This came about 24 hours too late for me because I sat my first exam in about 15 years yesterday as part of a master's course I'm doing, which was a fairly shocking experience in going back to my student existence, and the last 4 or 5 days I've been revising furiously. So this is actually a good masterclass for me, somewhat after the event, in how I could have done that, I'm sure, a lot better than I actually did. So I've got a lot to learn. It's going to be good. And in the book, Josh argues that it's possible to go from knowing absolutely nothing to picking up a new skill and performing it pretty well in just 20 hours of deliberate, focused practice. And he's going to show us how by deconstructing complex skills, maximizing productivity, and removing common learning barriers, we can achieve a lot more than we think we can in a very fast and actually fun way. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Josh Kaufman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I suspect that in the back of your mind, there's probably something that you've wanted to learn how to do for a long time now. Maybe it's something that you want to do for work. Maybe something like programming or design or some professional skill that if you could just learn that thing would give you an advantage, would help you do something really great for your customers or your clients or your employees. Or maybe it's something personal. Maybe you want to learn a new language or learn how to draw or learn how to paint, or learn how to cook, or do one of the millions of things that people all around the world do for fun in their spare time. And for whatever is in the back of your mind, you've probably had the experience of thinking to yourself, it would be really great to learn that thing, but I just don't have time. I have work to do, I have family obligations, I have so much in my schedule already that I just don't have time to sit down and learn that thing. And so we don't. We put it off. And 2 years ago, I became very curious about the process of learning something new, deciding finally to sit down and learn that thing, or in my case, several things, that have been in the back of my mind for a long time now. And this decision to sit down and learn something new came at a very interesting personal time in my life. Something that I'm sure many of you will sound familiar. My daughter, Leela, was born. And all of a sudden, I had no free time. I was working in my job. My wife also runs a business. And taking care of Leela meant that I had no spare hours in a day. And I was already feeling time-strapped. And so I decided to really take a step back and do some research to figure out, how do we learn? How do we learn things quickly? How do we learn things in a way that allows us to go from knowing absolutely nothing about a skill to being really good in a very short period of time? And hopefully to have that process be as fun and exciting and not frustrating and not stressful. And so I decided to go to the library and look up what cognitive psychology says about how we learn. And have any of you been to the bookstore to look at books about learning skill acquisition? There's one idea that keeps coming up over and over and over again. Does anybody know what that is? The 10,000 hour rule. It takes 10,000 hours to learn something. Right? So here I was, I already had no free time, and every book, every resource, every website, every video that I could find about skill acquisition said, it takes so long. It's so hard. It takes 10,000 hours to become good at something. I didn't have 2 hours, let alone 10,000, right? So I actually decided to go and look at that research. The 10,000 hour rule was popularized in a book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Fantastic book. The research is really fascinating. So the original idea of the 10,000 hour rule came from studies. It was a gentleman by the name of K. Anders Ericsson at the University of Florida who studied people like chess grandmasters and people who win the PGA Tour at golf, people who are the very best in the world at whatever it is that they do. And what Dr. Ericsson found was very simple. The more you practice, the more time you spend in what he called deliberate practice, focusing and systematically working on the elements of the skill, the more time you spend, better you get. And in every discipline, what you usually find is the people at the pinnacle of their careers, the people that are the best in the world, have spent around 10,000 hours over a period of at least 10 years, systematically practicing that element of skill. So that set of research is valid as far as it goes, but it doesn't go very far. And here's why. Most of us, when we decide to learn something new for ourselves, we do not have the goal of setting out to be the very best in the world at some very narrow competitive field, right? But since this idea came to the popular consciousness 5 or 6 years ago, we've played a society-wide game of telephone about this particular idea. So Dr. Ericsson was saying something very specific. It takes 10,000 hours to reach the top of ultra-competitive, easily ranked performance fields, right? Very specific. But as that message passed from one person to another, it became, it takes 10,000 hours to master something. It takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. It takes 10,000 hours to become good at something. And it takes 10,000 hours to learn something. But that last statement, it takes 10,000 hours to learn something, is demonstrably not true. It's not true, and thank goodness it's not true, because we can decide to sit down for ourselves and spend a little bit of time going from knowing absolutely nothing about any subject that you could think of, putting a little bit of practice, and becoming very, very good in a very short period of time. And what my research over the past 2 years has indicated is the order of magnitude of going from knowing absolutely nothing to being really good and knowing that you're good is about 20 hours, not 10,000. 20 hours is about 40 minutes a day, every day, for about a month. Even in the busiest schedules, if you can clear a half an hour to 45 minutes a day to sit down and finally learn that thing that you've always wanted to learn, you will be astounded, absolutely astounded, at how good you become in a very short period of time. And so what I discuss in the first 20 hours is a method of sitting down, deciding to learn something you've never done before, and then learning that in as effective and efficient a way as you possibly can. And the method, very broadly, has 5 steps, and they're very simple. The first is, decide exactly what you want. What do you want to be able to do? What is it going to look like when you're done? What are you going to be able to look at yourself and say, I did this thing that I've always wanted to do? What does it look like? The more clearly and completely you're able to define exactly what you want to be able to do, the easier it will be for you to find ways to accomplish that desired end result as quickly and efficiently as possible. I call this defining a target performance level. How well do you want to be able to perform, and what does that performance actually look like in the moment? The second thing that you do is what I call deconstructing the skill. So most of the things that we think of as skills aren't really just one skill. They're bundles of smaller sub-skills that we use in combination with each other, right? So imagine a skill like golf. Golf is not just one thing. It's a bundle of all sorts of things. And for example, driving off the tee and chipping on the green have very little to do in common with each other. Very few skills overlap there, but they're both important if you want to be able to play golf well. So instead of trying to learn golf as a global skill, you break it apart into these smaller parts and you practice the most important sub-skills, the things that you're going to use most, first. That allows you to focus on the elements of practice that actually give you the performance that you're looking for. So you're breaking the skill down into the smallest parts you possibly can and practicing the individual sub-skills. Okay? Now, the third part is researching. Researching just enough that you're able to identify the most important sub-skills involved in whatever it is that you want to learn how to do. But also understanding and being able to self-correct as you're practicing. So go out and find 3 to 5 books, courses, DVDs, trainers, people or resources that can help you do that initial deconstruction and understand which are the sub-skills that are going to help you get as good as you possibly can as quickly as possible. Now the trick is, don't allow that research to become a form of procrastination in itself. Has anybody ever had this experience? This is a big struggle for me because I love research. It's something that I do naturally. So, for example, I decided that I wanted to learn how to program. I wanted to be able to write software to help me with my business. And so I went to the bookstore and I got 20 books on programming. I said, I'm going to read all of these things, I'm going to go through all of these training programs, and then I'm going to sit down and write a program. Not the best approach. The best approach is to pick 3, 4, 5 resources. You don't go through them completely. You skim them. And what you're looking for in that initial research process, go through lots of different resources and identify the ideas that come up over and over and over again. That's a very clear indication that those concepts and those techniques are particularly important. So those are the things that you should know, so you can self-correct as you practice, and those are the sub-skills that you should probably practice first. So don't let that research become a form of procrastination. Do just enough to allow you to jump into the actual practice as quickly as possible and self-correct as you practice. The fourth part is removing barriers to practice, making it easy to sit down and actually do the thing you want to get better at. So in our lives, we have thousands of distractions. We have the television and the internet and social media and family members and friends and all of the things in our lives that make us so busy. During the practice process, it's extremely important to make sure that you are not distracted by outside forces. Turn off the TV. Block the internet. Close the door. Turn off your cell phone. Remove the distractions that can take your focus away from whatever this thing that you're trying to practice is, and make sure that that time that you have set aside to practice in a way that was going to make you better is as undivided and focused as possible. Likewise, anything you can do to make it easy for yourself to practice, do that. So instead of relying on your willpower to force yourself to sit down every single time, use a little bit of willpower once and make it easy for yourself to do the things you want to do. So for example, one classic skill that people usually want to learn, playing the guitar. Which is easier? Picking up a guitar that is right next to you, sitting on a stand by the chair that you usually sit on, or getting a guitar out of a case that's in the back of a closet on the other side of your house every time you want to practice, right? By making it easy, having the guitar next to you, you make it easier to remind yourself that practice is a priority, and you make it easier to actually pick up that guitar and start practicing in the moment. Anything you can do to remove friction or remove effort from desiring to practice to getting started is a benefit. It helps you do what you've already decided to do. And fifth, and very importantly, pre-commit to at least 20 hours of focused, deliberate practice before you begin. And that pre-commitment is very important because it serves a couple of different purposes. The first is the pre-commitment itself, deciding I'm going to invest at least 20 hours in this skill, or I'm not going to do it at all, is a check upon yourself. How important is this, really? Are you willing to rearrange your schedule? Are you willing to get the resources? Are you willing to invest a certain amount of time practicing this skill? Or aren't you? If you're not, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good indication to yourself that this particular skill isn't important enough for you to focus on right now. There's no shame in that. Drop that skill and decide to learn something else. Life is short, right? But if it is important to you, and you're willing to make that pre-commitment of at least 20 hours of practice, it does a number of important things. The first is, the early hours of practice are frustrating for everyone. Everybody at the beginning of everything is absolutely horrible, and they know it. And so understanding that that is a fundamental feature of how skill acquisition works, by pre-committing to at least 20 hours of practice, you are guaranteeing to yourself that you are going to make it through those early, frustrating hours where nothing is working, or you come up against an unexpected obstacle, or you're really horrible and you're not very comfortable with that. By pre-committing a certain amount of time, you are guaranteeing to yourself that you are able to push past that early frustration and actually see results from your practice. So the idea of pre-committing 20 hours is really, there's nothing magical about that number. It's a line in the sand. 20 hours of deliberate practice is long enough to see really dramatic results, going from knowing absolutely nothing to being very good in a short period of time. But it's not also so long that it's a barrier to committing to that practice time in the first place. So the behavioral psychology behind the 20-hour mark is pre-committing helps you break through that early frustration and stick with it long enough to see results. And that's really it. There's no magic to it. It's just focused, strategic effort invested in something you care about and something that is going to be rewarding to yourself and to your life. Whether that's for a personal skill, something you've wanted to do for a long time, or a professional skill, something that's going to help you serve your customers or your clients or your employees in a new and better way. That's the core of the method. And I think what's really exciting about skill acquisition in general is that learning is a uniquely human activity. We're all learning. We're all capable of learning hundreds or thousands of different things over the course of our life. And what this process really does, it may strike you as common sense. It is. It's intentionally so. Learning, the process of learning, is not difficult. What we're doing in this process is really just removing all of the frustrations, all of the barriers, all of the things that get in the way of us sitting down and doing the work. And so instead of dabbling a little bit here and dabbling a little bit over there and not really amassing enough time to get good at something, we're shaping our behavior in such a way that we will actually see results from the time and attention that we're spending improving something. So it is common sense. And really, when you sit down and learn something, these are the things that everybody naturally does. We just have a choice. We can do it the hard, inefficient way, or we can do it the easy, straightforward, strategic way. And if you do it the strategic way, you can save yourself a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of effort. Does that make sense? As a fundamental method, is that straightforward to understand? Okay. So it's one thing to talk about this. It's quite another thing to show it. I actually brought something for you. One of the things that I always wanted to learn how to do was play the ukulele. And I actually went so far as to buy one and had the classic mistake of it sat in my closet. And I didn't do anything with it. That became really frustrating. So in the process of researching the first 20 hours, I am really not comfortable with teaching something that I am not absolutely sure works. And so I did this research, I created the method, and then I tried it on a bunch of different things. So I learned how to program, I learned how to play the ukulele, I learned how to windsurf. I learned how to type on a new keyboard layout, which was fascinating. And the Chinese board game Go with the white and black stones, I learned how to play that for the first time. And actually, what I just got done learning a couple weeks ago was the basics of cinematography. I bought a movie camera and created a movie that tells the story of the book, which you can see online on YouTube. It just went up a couple days ago. But ukulele was one of the things that I had wanted to learn for a long time and just never really sat down, never got serious enough about it to make any progress. So one of the things about ukulele, and that's actually the Hawaiian pronunciation, the American British version is ukulele. They're both valid. I know the Hawaiian, and so I try to use it. So playing the ukulele is a really great example of a classic motor skill, right? You are learning how to move your body in such a way in a certain time and make certain shapes with your fingers in order to make music come out of the instrument, right? So it's very akin to learning how to skateboard or learning how to windsurf or any other of the, learning how to chop with a knife when you're cooking. Those types of physical movement skills in the research literature are called motor skills. And so one of the interesting things about learning motor skills is there's a tremendous amount of research in motor skill literature that says if you practice shortly before sleeping, you actually learn or remember, you can consolidate the practice in a way that helps you perform better the next day. And so the practice strategy for ukulele was very simple. 40 minutes every day before I went to bed, I practiced. And the practice looked something like this. Usually with deconstruction, if you feel like you're being too simple, you're probably doing it right. And so I started, got a nice ukulele, and the very first thing was it didn't have strings on it. So I had to put strings on it, otherwise you couldn't play, right? Sometimes there are environmental things that you need to make sure are present, certain tools, certain characteristics, before you can start practicing. So I got an ukulele, I put strings on it, I tuned it, and the early hours of practice were very simple. I was learning chords, which basically shapes of the fingers on my left hand pressing down on the fretboard, and then strumming patterns on the right hand. So the early hours of practice were, this is a G chord, and this is a D chord, and this is an E minor chord, and this is a C chord. Very simple, and I would just go back over and over, trying to memorize the chord name and the shape of the fingers and make sure that my technique was good enough. I was pressing down on the frets in a way that caused it to sound relatively well, or relatively good, right? Very simple, very straightforward. So isolate the left hand, shapes of chords. Right hand was very much strumming patterns. So I'm doing something different, doing something more complicated. The same thing on the left hand, something different on the right hand. You have no idea how much I've practiced this sequence over and over and over again. And the repetition is really important because by doing it over and over again, you allow your brain to go through there are three phases of learning. So cognitive, you're really thinking about it, you're really focusing. It's like, this is a G chord, this is a D chord. You're really, really thinking about it. The interrelating part of the learning process is where you're starting to do it on your own. It's starting to feel more natural. You don't have to spend as much time and energy thinking about it. And eventually, the third stage of learning is where it's automatic. You can just do it. And one of the things that I really wanted to do in learning how to play the ukulele was I wanted to be able to play and sing at the same time. That's the fun part, right? So I was focusing on really learning this sequence and making it automatic enough that I didn't have to think about it. I was just doing it, okay? So we have all sorts of things that we can do. once that was reasonably automatic, what I started learning were patterns in songs. As it turns out, you can play approximately 60% of songs ever written with 2 chord progressions. So I'll show them to you right now. So the first one is what's called a basic 1-4-5 progression. And probably the easiest way to illustrate that is twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Very simple 1-4-5 progression, right? Even modern songs use this. This is a song, la la la, Elmo's song. La la la, la la la, Elmo's song. La la la, la. It's the same thing. Probably the most famous pop song example of this is You ain't nothing but a hound dog, yeah, crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, yeah, crying all the time. Well, you ain't never caught a rabbit and you ain't no friend of mine. Right? 1-4-5, it's the same thing over and over again. And so learning 1-4-5 allowed me to learn a lot of common songs. I started practicing so I could sing to my daughter, Leela, at night. And a lot of children's songs, that's all it is. You know 3 chords, you know how to switch between them. You can play lots of things. It only took a couple of hours to learn the chords, learn the progression, and make what my left and right hand were doing automatic enough that I could play it, and it was reasonably good. And sure, I made mistakes. That was part of the process. And so between the 1-4-5 progression and this is one of my favorite things ever. There was a wonderful band in Australia called Axis of Awesome. They are a comedy rock band. And they have a song that they call the 4-chord song. And the gag is that you can play every pop song ever written if you know 4 chords and you know how to switch between them. And those chords are, at least in this key, G, D, E minor, and C. That chord progression over and over and over, you can pump out every pop song ever. So for example, just a small town girl living in a lonely world. She took a midnight train going anywhere. And Adele, I heard that you settled down, that you found a girl, that you're married now. Every night in my dreams I see you, I feel you. That is how I know we'll go on. I won't hesitate no more, it cannot wait, I'm yours. 'Cause you're amazing, we did amazing things. If I could, then I would, I'd go wherever you will. And can you feel the love tonight? She will be loved, and she will be loved. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. Sometimes I feel like I don't have a partner. No woman, no cry, Mama, this surely is a dream. I come from London down under. Once a jolly swag man camped by a billabong. Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my number, so call me. Hey, sexy lady, whoop, 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 whoop. Welcome Gangnam Style, time to say goodbye. Closing time. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Thank you. Thank you. I love that song. And so you can really start to see, I started out with the simplest of the simple. Where does my left hand go, and where does my right hand go, and what do I do together? Practice that enough, so learning the chords, learning the progression became reasonably automatic, and then just layered the songs on top of it. And it's really not that complicated. But when you're just getting started, it's playing an instrument is so complicated, there's so many things to do. No, you just break it down. Isolate what you exactly want to be able to do, and practice the most important sub-skills first. And so, and I'm continuing to do this. So I've put over 20 hours in ukulele now, and I'm continuing to play. So one of the nice parts about this process is you get to 20 hours, you have a certain level of skill. If you want to keep improving, just do it again. Do another 20 hours and decide what you want to go from there. And so I'm starting to learn individual notes and licks, and I actually have an electric ukulele on order, which is really cool. It's just like an electric guitar, but it's an ukulele. And so learning songs that require more than just simple strumming, going up and down the fretboard, that's the next challenge. And it's nice. The first 20 hours that I put into learning the instrument has prepared me for that next step. And I'll get as far as I can go in 20 hours, see where I am, and just layer the practice on top of each other over and over and over again until I'm as good as I want to be. And that's the really nice part about this learning process in general. You can use it to learn anything, literally anything. So just take a moment and just think for yourself. What is that thing that you have always wanted to learn how to do? What is that for you? It's different for everybody, but in my experience, everybody has it. And so what is that for you? And there is a way for you to set aside the time and to break it down and to practice in a smart way and to become really, really good at something in not a whole lot of time. So the fun part about doing this research and now talking about this idea with people is I'm hearing from all sorts of people about what they're going to learn to do. I just heard from a reader the other day who went from knowing absolutely nothing to taking his first solo flight in an airplane. And it took him 16 and a half hours to learn. A lifelong dream. Less than a week. Amazing. And he did it safely with an instructor, helping him deconstruct the skill and understand what was going on. I also just heard from a reader, his grandmother is 90 years old, and she just decided this week to sit down and learn how to play the piano. Because it's always something she's wanted to learn how to do. And so she's going to sit down and put in the time, and she'll be really good. She really will. So what is that thing for you? What do you want to learn? What lights you up? Go and learn that thing. It only takes 20 hours. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you very much, Josh. Well, one thing's for certain, ukulele sales will spike as a result of this event. I want to go and get one myself. I found the problem, I'm trying to learn guitar, and there's some sort of kind of perverse effects of having little kids around, because you're trying to learn this thing because you want to sing them nursery songs, and the guitar's right by the sofa where you can pick it up, and then your 2-year-old decides he wants to learn the guitar too. So there's a bit of, something you have to kind of juggle.
It's funny, I actually have at home a decoy ukulele that is just for Leela, because when I bring mine out, she wants to practice too. So she has hers, and I have mine, and it works reasonably well.
Brilliant. Well, so I'm sure you've got lots and lots of questions, all sorts of things you want to learn as well. Let's just get started. If I can get on the actors first before let's get started. I just wanted to ask you about what you say in the book in terms of, and just now, in terms of how broad these principles could be in terms of learning opportunities. So you say potentially this model could apply to just about anything that you're learning. In the book, they're primarily, I guess it's fair to say, kind of motor skills, so windsurfing, yoga, that kind of thing, and also perhaps kind of rule-based activities, learning how to program or learning a complex rule-based game like Go. But, and you're quite, I don't know what the word is, scathing, but critical of the way the education system works, the idea of what you call kind of credentialing and the academic world of getting past a kind of post, but it's not something that's necessarily something you can apply in quite an effective way as it might be.
Right.
So how do these principles potentially challenge the way we teach children, we learn ourselves in terms of understanding a complex subject and learning it in a kind of more academic sense, I suppose?
Yeah, I think academic sorts of learning are actually the hardest types of learning, because usually if you're learning something you're really fascinated by, you have that internal motivation of, I'm interested in that thing, I'm going to go out and learn how to do it. Some of the things that you learn in the course of daily life, like I don't really know anybody who thinks topics like accounting and finance and bookkeeping are the most intellectually stimulating things on the face of the earth, right? But the instrumental value of that is very high in some cases. And sometimes that instrumental value is enough to kind of get you excited and to sit down and learn the thing. I think academic learning in the sense of you are in a situation where you have to learn something because somebody else has decided that it's important to you and that you're going to go through the topic in a certain way, which may or may not be best for you. And you're going to do it on a certain time schedule, which may or may not be best for you. There are a lot of compounding factors that make academic learning both very difficult sometimes on an emotional basis and also not particularly efficient because it's not being done in a way that is where it is fitting your goals, your priorities, what you're going to get out of it, and you're not able to tune that learning process as much to what you need and want at that particular time. And so I think the biggest things of value in the educational system that children come away with are the skills, right? How do you read in a way that you can comprehend? How can you write in a way that allows you to be clear and persuasive? How do you use concepts from mathematics? Not just formulas, not just computational things, but concepts to look at the world around you and understand that in a more complete way. Those skills are extremely valuable. And the part that I don't necessarily like about the credentialing systems that exist at every level, whether it's primary school all the way up through graduate education, the credentialing process gets in the way of the skill acquisition. But the primary value in the whole process is the skill acquisition. So I would really like to see, in a broader society, way more of a focus on building skills and having that be the core of what we're doing instead of memorizing a lot of information that could probably be just as easily found on the internet, if that makes sense.
And that was the basis, I think it's fair to say, of your last book on the personal MBA, to challenge the paradigm of how we learn in a subject as complex as business and finance. That kind of,
And personal MBA, the difference in the approach there with a lot of other resources and business training programs is it treated business as a skill. It's something that you can learn about, it's something that you can practice, and it's something that you can get better at. And by building the skills of thinking about business in a certain way, you can actually do something with that, which is go out into the world and create a new business that has never existed before, or go into work and recommend a change that is actually going to get the result that you intend for it.
Yeah. And just one thing on a more practical level then, in terms of that's the sort of conceptual side, but
sure.
The motivation to keep going through the part of practice when you're horrible, and it's depressing how little progress you kind of make. What does the literature say from your research in terms of how far you should push yourself to be out of your comfort zone, to keep failing to kind of stretch yourself, versus building it up in a sort of more incremental way so that you constantly feel like you're making progress and you get that kind of psychological reward of knowing, I've just done that. You don't kind of crash too often, if you know what I mean. Yeah. What's the sort of right balance to get that? Because that can be a hard thing to strike, I presume.
The research literature actually says very little about this topic because most of the research about skill acquisition, at least of this type, tends to focus more on the longer term, becoming extremely good at something, and very, very little of it, with a few exceptions, on that critical early part of learning. The best that they've found is a result that keeps coming up over and over and over again, which is your rate of learning, your rate of skill acquisition is absolutely the highest in those first couple of hours across every skill. It's called the power law of practice or the power law of learning. You improve a tremendous amount in those early few hours. But how to go about that process for professional or personal skills, not a whole lot of research on that. That's actually where the idea of the first 20 hours came from. Because by making that pre-commitment to practicing at least 20 hours before you start doing anything, part of what you're doing is transferring what you feel, the excitement or whatever it is that you want to get out of the skill, by making that pre-commitment, you're kind of advancing that into the future, right? You're making it easier for yourself to remember that there's a reason why you're going through this pain right now, because you want to get something from it.
And you're setting, I guess, a limit on it, so it doesn't
Exactly.
feel like it's an indefinite amount of pain.
Exactly.
It's a manageable amount.
And you know what? If you really don't like something, or you're really horrible at it, 20 hours isn't a tremendous amount of time. And so if you reach the 20-hour mark and you say, you know what, this is not for me. This is not something that I'm interested in, or I'm not good at, I don't think I can invest more time and get any more use out of, then fantastic. Drop it at that point. Now you have 20 hours worth of personal experience about what that thing actually looks like. The biggest failure is dabbling for an hour or two and deciding I'm not talented at fill in the blank, whatever it is that you're doing, and not continuing to explore something that you may be really good at and that may be really beneficial to you.
Yeah. Great, fantastic. Okay, let's open it up to questions then. I'm sure there's loads. Okay, we'll start here at the front. Yeah. Oh, sorry, could you say, yes, wait for the microphone, please, I should say, and if you could say...
Have you encountered much skepticism? I mean, we live in a world that generally tells people that everything's quite difficult.
Yes. There is a... it depends on how much... Depends on how much somebody has read about all of this. Because, really, for the past 5 or 6 years now, the message at large in our culture has been learning new skills is difficult, practicing new things is difficult, all of this, very, very mastery-oriented talk. And if you're not going to be world-class, then why bother at all? So from folks who are really deep into that sort of mindset, there's a certain amount of skepticism. I think one thing that really helps is understanding what the process looks like. And it really is. It's making something that we naturally do much simpler and easy to do in practice, and removing a lot of early frustrations from the process. So by and large, the reception has been overwhelmingly positive. Because I think once you learn what the method entails, it's much easier to visualize how you can take it and learn that thing that you've always wanted to be able to do. Thanks.
Okay, at the back there, yep. Gentleman there at the back, and then there's a microphone just coming. Thanks.
I just wonder if one of the kind of major barriers is being adults. When we do make mistakes, we feel stupid.
Yes.
I think
Yes,
that's one
we
of the
do.
things. And when a child is learning to walk, if it falls over, it doesn't stay down and say, I can't do this. It gets up again. That, to me, is one of the major obstacles. And secondly, is there a great skill in being really bad at something as well?
I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way, but yeah. I mean, I think, to your first point, there's a story or an explanation that children are so much better at picking up new things than we are, right? Children learn naturally. They just absorb all of this stuff. The only real difference, well, there are two major differences. First, children have a lot of unstructured time to explore and experiment and try things out, right? Which as adults, we usually have more demands on our time and attention. That's one difference. The other difference is, as you said, when a child falls, they don't curse themselves and say, I'm bad at walking, right? It's a part of the learning experience. They get up and they try again. And so, as adults, we tend to have more of a, we explain to ourselves, I'm bad at this, I'm not good at this is horrible. And we get very self-conscious and very uptight about our early failures. When really, it's just, we're gaining experience, we're experimenting. And so, by going through that process and changing the way that we are labeling some of those early experiences, we can make it much easier on ourselves to pick up something new.
Great, let's take a quick question from our web viewers, and then we'll come back to the audience here. So I think there's a question on Twitter.
Hi, yeah, we've got quite a few questions on Twitter. First one was, what's the role of a tutor or a coach in this learning methodology?
So tutors or coaches or instructors help in a couple of different areas. First, having an experienced person explain what good performance looks like and help you deconstruct the early parts of that skill can be tremendously, tremendously valuable. Because usually when you're starting something new, unless it's related to something you've done before, you're not necessarily sure how to do that deconstruction. So having somebody step in and say, no, these are the important parts, these are the things that you should focus on first, that's very, very valuable. The other part of instruction is talking about the gentleman who learned how to fly in 16 and a half hours. Sometimes skills have safety considerations, right? Really important ones, like you should probably know how to land the airplane before you take off. So, in those types of situations, instructors can be very, very valuable because they can point you to hidden dangers or things that you really need to be prepared for, and they can give you guidance as you're performing to help you self-correct as you're practicing.
Question from this side? Yes, gentleman there with the pen. Yep.
Thank you. Is it possible to learn how to become the author of a best-selling business book in 20 hours? I mean, you've written a very successful business book, which The Personal MBA, it's a great book.
Thank you.
Clearly, it took probably more than 20 hours to write it, but I mean, what process, that's what I'm interested in, what process might be involved for any of us if we decided, I'm going to learn how to write a best-selling business book?
Yeah, so there's actually, let's do a very simple deconstruction of that, right? Write a best-selling book is a very large topic. So you have the writing part. How do you write a book that people find useful and valuable and want to talk about? And then how do you make sure that people are aware that that book exists, hopefully in a way that makes them interested in picking it up and giving it a try? And so, you can really break those things down. Like one of the things that I didn't fully appreciate until I was into the process of writing the Personal MBA was how important an outline was. Something that is talked about in every English class on the face of the earth, and I think every student on the face of the earth probably just writes the paper because it's short and then writes an outline because it's required. When you're doing a longer work, the outline is how the whole book hangs together, what you're going to talk about and in what order and how one subject flows to the next. So you can treat that, as an isolated skill, right? If you have a book idea, just start at the outline phase. Don't worry about the whole completion of the book. Just start outlining. How is this thing, what am I going to talk about? How is one subject going to flow to the next? What am I going to discuss and what am I going to leave out? Just treating that as a skill in and of itself gives you a much less scary place to start, less overwhelming thing. And the same thing goes with marketing. Marketing has changed dramatically over the course of the past 10 years. And a lot of the ways that you can make people aware of the existence of something that can help them are skills that literally everybody in the industry is trying to acquire right at this very moment because nobody knows what works and what doesn't anymore. So yeah, just break it down, focus on the individual parts, and you're that much closer to writing a best-selling book.
And that's actually one of the things you mentioned there about the fact that obviously, however much you learn on the subject, the environment around you is changing all the time and changing the rules of the game. And with marketing books, with the web now, there's all these different ways you can potentially get recognition or notoriety for the work you do. So I guess you've got to, I think in the book you talk about Carol Dweck and the work around having a growth mindset, that that learning is an ongoing, continuous, lifelong activity. So one question I guess arises from that, which is, how do you make the practice in itself of learning an intrinsic goal in itself? Because in a way, is there a danger in saying in your model that you're setting your focus on the goal, to be able to play the ukulele well, and that somehow makes the practice part of it seem like a kind of chore to get to that point, where actually the actual sheer act of sitting and even just doing the chord changes should somehow in itself be a rewarding thing to do.
Yeah.
I
think, at least for me, the rewarding part comes from seeing yourself have this capability or be able to do something that a couple days ago or a couple weeks ago you haven't been able to do. And just that process of deciding to learn something, sitting down and noticing your improvement in skill, I think is really intrinsically rewarding for pretty much everybody. So the skills, the absolute skills that we choose to acquire may be very, very different because we all have different goals, we all have different priorities. I think people get a lot more excited about learning when they have the experience of deciding to learn something for themselves and they actually do it, and it makes them want to do it again.
Great. Do we have any questions? Oh yes, the lady here from the front.
A simple question.
Sorry, with a microphone, yes.
Did you decide to challenge yourself as far as linguistic skills, i.e., did you try to learn a foreign language?
Yes. So foreign language was one of the things that I intentionally decided not to learn. And so, you know, so not necessarily as the method doesn't work on that, because it absolutely does. A lot of the things, depending on the language, you'll see patterns. Like one of the things is called Zipf's law, which is if you look at the distribution of words used in a language, you'll see a very tiny fraction of the words being used the vast majority of the time. So for English, if I am getting the statistic right, something like 40% of all English language usage is accounted for by 25 words. So those 25 words are probably really important to know, right? If you don't know English, learn those first, and you'll be able to understand much more than you could otherwise. So for me, you know, going back to the idea of pre-committing 20 hours into the doing of something, I thought about learning a language, and what I very quickly realized was that was going to become an academic exercise for me. So for example, if I were planning to move to another country, like China, for example, and I wanted to be able to converse in Chinese by the time I got there, that's a really good reason for me to sit down and start learning Chinese right now. At this point, I don't know anybody that I would ever have a conversation or write to in Chinese, and so I have other things that I can invest my time in that I'm more apt to follow through on, because it's not an academic exercise. The closest thing, this is actually something on my list, and it follows the same principles, is I'm going to learn shorthand. So there's an alphanumeric shorthand called Yublin, which tries to apply some of the same principles to taking notes in English, and takes the 100 or so most common words in the English language and translates them into 1- and 2-letter abbreviations. So as you're writing, you can write really fast because most of the words take only 1 or 2 letters. Same principles, same method, similar results.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's take a group of questions because we want to make sure we get as many as we can in
Yeah,
the time,
totally.
if that's okay. Yeah. So let's take, let's say 3 questions. If you could make them nice and short, that would be great. Gentleman here, in the black shirt here, and then at the back there, that gentleman there. Thank you.
Thank you. It's fascinating
yes, here first.
and entertaining, and that's not an easy cocktail to shake.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm just wondering, though, whether there aren't constraints on your method that you haven't acknowledged. Most of what you've spoken to has been addressed to knowing how to do something rather than knowing that. I'm familiar with the epistemological distinction between the two. We also know there's a neurological basis for differentiation as well. Is what you're saying, is your method appropriate to skills acquisition, but does it have anything at all to say to people like me who get fired up by taking an intrinsic satisfaction in knowing facts?
Yeah, I think
Let's
that...
just we'll take the other 2 at the same
Yeah,
time.
yes,
and then
totally.
if that's okay,
Yeah,
we'll speak together. So, yeah, so.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi there. Really enjoyed that, thank you.
Sure.
So basically, the more different things you learn, I'm guessing kind of the more confident you got with your learning abilities.
Mm-hmm.
But especially early on, you mentioned about removing barriers to practice, and you focused on external barriers. Just wonder if in those early days, if you got some tips with regard to removing internal barriers.
Yes. Okay.
Yep. Okay, great.
Okay.
And then there was a gentleman at the back, I think, who's up.
Hi, Ben Harvey, fellow. You talk a lot about critical thinking and process and also adaptability. I guess my question is, what's your advice to leadership of higher education, government, around labour markets and educating the next generation for adaptability and critical thinking over sheer skills and accreditation so they can adapt to changes in economic variation in labour markets and so forth?
Absolutely. Okay. So in order, one of
Yeah, I was going to say, so yes, do you want to recap
Yeah.
all that? That's great.
yeah, sure. So on the learning things versus skills, one of the ways that I think about that is a skill is something that requires a certain level of performance in doing it right. So there is a distinction between knowing something, having some information in your brain, which is intrinsically rewarding. I love that too. But skills as a topic is something that you can practice that requires a certain threshold of performance in the world. So I really, in this research, tried to focus on what does it take to learn something where performance is a requirement. In terms of explanatory styles or internal barriers to learning new things, is something that you mentioned earlier. Dr. Carol Dweck has some wonderful research. She has a great book on the topic called Mindset, where it talks about the difference between children, for example, in an educational environment, who are primed to believe that your skills are fixed, you're either talented at something or you're not, and there's nothing that you can do about that, or children that are, versus children that are primed to believe your mind is like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you practice, the more it grows. And there's now a wide body of research that says the latter belief, that your mind is like a muscle, if you practice, you will become better at something. It's not a question of if, it's a matter of when and how soon, is absolutely correct. And so a lot of the early emotional barriers, aside from that initial burst of frustration of not being good at something at the beginning, is that really kind of sinking sensation at the beginning. It's like, I'm going to try this, but I suspect that I'm not going to be very good and there's nothing I can do about that. What research says is that's absolutely not true. You can practice anything and you will be much better at it after the practice than you were at the beginning.
And there's things research, psychological research around attribution as well.
Yes.
The degree to which you attribute causation to internal or external factors, and also how stable or unstable you think those would be. So, you're more likely to be motivated to continue learning if you don't think it's internal and stable, i.e. permanent, that you are going to be horrible. It's going to be something that's going to, change as a result of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the last question around critical thinking and how we equip the workforce to be adaptive in the kind of economic context.
The biggest thing there is, as an individual participating in a labor market, it's tremendously empowering to know for yourself that you can decide to get better at something that will make you a more valuable, more marketable, more useful employee or business to your clients or to your customers. So on an individual level, this is something you can decide to go out and learn things that will help you double your salary in the next couple of years. Like, that is I've heard personal stories of that happening. You can decide to become a more valuable individual. I think on a broader societal level, the institutions and the companies that are not seriously thinking about how to support their employees and their leadership in acquiring new skills that are necessary to compete in new markets, those are the companies that are not going to be doing well if we look back from the next 10 years. And so understanding that there's a tremendous amount of, if you're a leader in an organization, whatever that organization is, the people who are working for you have to be doing a lot of this. And it takes time. It takes energy. And so you can't overload your workforce with a lot of demands and expect that they have the time and energy to continue developing in a way that's going to be beneficial. So I think a lot of the training programs, what I am starting to see is an emphasis on skills, an emphasis on performing in some capacity in a better and more productive way. And going back to our earlier conversation on education and education policy, I would love to see less of an emphasis on memorizing rote information and more of a leaving space to practice certain skills that those students will be using for the rest of their lives. The more time spent in skill acquisition, the better.
And I guess, that's one of the barriers has been traditionally in terms of skills investment has been the cost potentially to employers of investing.
Right.
And potentially the lack of understanding of knowing what kind of return they get on that investment.
Yes.
But if the message from the book is around how people can do it in actually quite agile, quite nimble ways, that's potentially a way to try to unlock a lot of that potential investment in people's skills.
A really good recent example of this is a lot of companies are implementing for example, an afternoon every week or one day every week, and treating it as an open project type of day. So we're going to stop what we're doing. We're going to make sure our customers are taken care of, obviously, but we're going to have a significant portion of our staff devote this day to doing something completely different than what they do on a day-to-day basis. So a 24-hour project or some new experiment. And if you just look, if you judge the performance of those types of policies based on the value of the raw output that comes from those days, hit or miss. Some good ideas, a lot of not really great stuff or usable stuff, but the hidden benefit of that is you are devoting a significant amount of time and allowing your employees to go through the process of exploring something new and valuable. And the long-term results of that can be astounding. So for example, the most widely used email program in the world today, it's Google's email program, Gmail, came out of a side project from the guy who created that. And so leaving enough room and space for those types of things to happen, you give people the opportunity to invest time in developing skills, and you will be astounded at what
And
they...
give them, I guess, the autonomy to do it in the way that fits them. Yeah,
absolutely.
Have we got time for one more lightning quick web question? So anyone, one of those before we finish off? That's great. And then we'll finish up.
The last one. How does play, games and fun affect our learning?
Well, the more fun it is, the more likely it is that you're actually going to go through that practice process, right? So, and one of the things that can help in this process, which I don't talk a whole lot about, but is absolutely true, if you feel like you're competing against yourself or you're competing against somebody else to learn the same thing, that can be tremendously motivating, depending upon your personality. And so, making it a game or competing against somebody else, or even just the idea that somebody you know and respect knows that you're learning this thing and they're curious about the results of it, even something as little as that can make a huge difference in whether you follow through on the practice or not.
I was going to thank you. There's a kind of explosion of these websites now where you can make, say, for example, keeping fit, social and fun, and you map your runs and your courses and you exchange information with other people and that kind of thing.
And it's,
I suppose in a way, as long as that doesn't become a source of distraction, procrastination, where you sit there
Exactly.
typing in your data while everyone else actually instead of running, because it's...
I'm not running very much, but my profile is awesome.
My touch typing has gone up massively, well, just thank you very much indeed from all of us to Josh. The thing to say is that he'll be out signing copies of the book if you'd like to buy a copy, but he might even strum a few more chords on the ukulele if you'll ask very nicely. So from all of us, thank you very much indeed, Josh, for a fantastic talk.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.